Hi, thanks for coming today. We're going to be talking about Bailey and the results of her assessment. I know that she's not been tested before, so this would be a good step to kind of look at where she is now and where she's going to be headed in the fall. She's going to be starting high school in a few months, and I know we're going to have a lot to talk about. And I know that you requested this assessment because you felt that Bailey was having a hard time with math. Um, I like to say she's a super sweet girl. I was really excited to work with her throughout the assessment. She seemed extremely comfortable. She had no problem speaking up when I asked her a question. Sometimes she would kind of throw out a few answers before she got to the one that she decided on. And this just makes me think maybe she wasn't quite confident with the answer, or she didn't know the answer, so she was just guessing. Um, she also pointed at the easel a lot excitedly when she felt that she was correct. So she got excited about knowing the answer to some problems. Um, and being that she didn't seem uncomfortable or anxious at all, I personally don't feel that I have any reason to doubt the validity of the results. So I think this would be a good step moving forward. For this assessment, we used an easel, and sometimes there would be words, numbers, or pictures. Sometimes it would be blank. And that's how I would be facing her, and I would read her a question, sometimes pointing to things on her side when necessary, and she would answer by either saying the answer verbally or pointing to the answer. So one of the things that I did want to show you to get a better idea is the way that this assessment is broken down. So these are where her scores are. And this shaded area is the average for her age and grade there. So the reason this is scaled like this is because every person is not going to test the same every time they test. They might get a couple of points lower, a couple of points higher. So this scale kind of leaves that room for flexibility in whether something was going on that day, they were feeling a little off. So this is just saying that 90% of the time, this is where her scores are going to lie, somewhere in here. This is the actual score here, this middle bar right here. And then this down at the bottom shows her whole cluster scores. So this is where she scored. Again, that's in kind of the below average section, and the shaded area is average. And then first we're going to start by talking about numeration here. So, which is shown in the below average range. This is the portion that measures the student's understanding with both whole numbers and rational numbers. She struggled a little bit with this portion. She did all right with the whole numbers, but once we got into some fractions, I think she had a hard time visualizing what they meant. So one of the questions required her to tell me what the fraction of a rectangle was. So a picture was shown, and she had to say what the fraction of the shaded piece was. And she stared at this for a while and just kind of guessed, and we just moved on. We just went past it. She also found it difficult to decipher the order of rational numbers or numbers with decimal points. One of the questions had her put the four numbers in order, and all of them contained decimal points. After looking at the easel for a little bit, she just kind of guessed the order, and again, we just moved on. The same thing happened with negative numbers, and she did mention to me that she doesn't like negative numbers. She always gets them mixed up. So this tells me she has a hard time maybe with visualizing the rational numbers. And then this second line here is the algebra portion. So again, to the below average range. Um, and the it measures the student's understanding of pre-algebraic and algebraic concepts. During this portion, Bailey started all right until some of the multiplication kind of came up. She had a hard time visualizing how to get the answer. For example, there was a question that asked her to balance things on a scale using shapes that were represented by numbers. And one of the problems was addition, and then the second number was missing. So we'll say it was a triangle that was worth 1, and then the number 3. So you had to add those together to get 4. And then there was a triangle on the other side and a number 4. So you'd multiply that to get 4. She couldn't figure out exactly how the multiplication worked. She wasn't able to get that second number missing to make the scale the same on both sides. She was, however, able to read a graph, and she told me she had never done that before, so that was super exciting for her. And then the third line represents the geometry, which is the low average to below average range. So she did do a little bit better on that part. This measures the ability to analyze, describe, compare, and classify 2 or 3-dimensional shapes. She did better on this portion and seemed comfortable with her shapes. When she was given a picture of a shape, and then there was a few smaller shapes also, and she had to kind of maneuver these shapes to make them into the larger shape. So she had to pick the group of shapes that would fit there. And she did really well with that. But she did have a hard time when you were looking at the shapes from a different angle. There was one where there were cubes stacked, and she couldn't visually, like mentally, figure out what it would look like from the top. So she had a hard time thinking about what the different angles would look like without actually being able to turn the cubes. And then this was also when they were folded in half. She wasn't able to figure that out either. There was one question comparing different views of stack blocks, and that was hard for her as well to just kind of mentally turn the blocks in her mind to see how they might look from a different angle. And then the fourth line down here is going to be measurements. And she was in the low average to below average range for that as well. This measures the individual's ability to compare objects on a variety of attributes and use non-standard and standard units to measure those. On this portion, she was able to find measurements when there were pictures for examples. One was beans on a toothbrush, so there was a toothbrush and there was 4 beans above it, and she had to figure out how many more beans would complete the toothbrush, make it as long as the toothbrush, and she was able to figure that out. I noticed that when there were cubes involved and she had to find the area, she would count each of the cubes rather than multiplying it to get that answer quicker, but she still was able to find the answer. She also struggled a little bit with money. She was asked to use the least amount of coins to create a certain dollar amount, and she was unable to figure out how to use the right amount of coins without using so many of them to get that number. And then the fifth line here is data analysis and probability right here. So she scored low average to below average in that as well. And this measures the individual's ability to collect, display, and interpret data, as well as their understanding of concepts associated with chance and probability. While Bailey let me know that she had never used a graph before, as I said, she did fairly well with this portion. She was able to read the graphs when there was a visual of it, and I was asking her like what the different axes meant, and she seemed pretty comfortable with the visual representation of it. She struggled a little bit with the probability, so she was given a picture of some crayons, and they were all different colors, and she had to figure out the probability of what it would be to get a green crayon. So she wasn't really sure how to go about that part. So she just gave it her best guess, and we moved on. So the last line down here shows how she fell in the overall basic concepts. This says that for the entire cluster, Bailey was landing below average in her basic concepts. So I think it's going to be helpful to maybe start some intervention and give her some extra support. Because it seems like she does have trouble with visualization in her mind. I think when it comes to like fractions and rational numbers, one intervention that I'd like to try is called concrete representational abstract. It's kind of a mouthful, so we can just refer to it as CRA. This will involve her using concrete objects, pictorial representations, or mathematical problems with numbers and symbols, and it is given using a model lead test approach. So it relies heavily on modeling and giving the immediate feedback to help her arrive at the right answer. So first, I'll explain the skill to her. We'll review the basic prerequisite skills that she's going to need, and so I think she's going to benefit mostly from the concrete portion of this intervention. So first off, I'll write a problem on the whiteboard. I'll use manipulative items to demonstrate the problem. I will then arrange the items to show the problem lined up in a different way. So I could do 3 groups of 4, and that'll be equal to 12. And then also show her that you could do 2 groups of 6, and that'll also equal 12. So then I'll give her a problem and let her try it on her own, and I'll be there to help kind of assist her and guide her to the answer if she needs my help. And then once she's confident and is able to figure it out with little to no support, I'll give her 5 problems on her own to work on, and she can do those independently. And I think this is going to be a good place to start.